In 2017, Rebeca Alvarez was 34 years old and had a life marked by contradictions that few they would have been able to bear without break. Youngest daughter of 3 brothers, they were grown in a small Virginia city where the routine of the family was spinning always around the kitchen of that one old wooden house. That place, filled with the smell of reheated coffee and toasted bread, was his children's shelter. There toward the tasks, listened the stories from his father about the harsh winters and improvised songs from his mother while cooked. The framed portraits in the walls showed their parents at different stages, smiling and proud. And the table, worn by the years, he kept the marks of knives and spilled glasses that were, in reality, scars of happy moments. However, that same space, which had once symbolized security and belonging, was transformed in a ruthless court day in which Rebeca, seeking comfort, found herself with the icy gaze of his brothers. Clara, the older, had become the social model of success, always dressed in designer clothes, with a dazzling engagement ring courtesy of her millionaire fiancé, and with a way of looking that made those who were there feel small the surrounded. Marcos, of the medium, he was a lawyer and he seemed to have born with the gesture of superiority that accompanied his expensive suit and his luxury watch. When Rebeca crossed the threshold of the kitchen that afternoon, what I hoped for was to share memories and seek support. In a moment of fragility, what he received was a judgment without appeal. "You're a dead weight, Rebeca," Clara declared, while was playing around with his glass of wine as if the words were mere crumbs. Marcos, with his arms crossed and a wry smile, he placed a check for $5,000 on the table, saying, "It's the least we can do for you." It was not a gesture of help, it was a sentence of exclusion, disguised as charity. Rebeca looked the check on the table, and for a few seconds the temptation to take it was mixed with the rage that rose up his chest like fire content. $5,000 could pay for several late monthly payments on your apartment, fill out the fridge empty, and until covered some medical treatment that had postponed. But it was not about the money. What was burning was the manner in which Market had slipped, as if he were feeding a stray dog, as if his own blood did not deserve dignity. She left the sheet rectangular there, intact, watching how the paper reflected the yellowish light of the ceiling lamp. He didn't say a single word, because he knew that any answer would be interpreted as weakness. He just stood up slowly, with a calm that hid his shaking in his hands, and left the kitchen without looking back, feeling that every portrait of his parents hanging in. I watched the walls in silence, that one betrayal. That night, Weil was driving back to his apartment. Sitio seemed colder than usual. The lights from the posts illuminated streets empty that seemed talk to him about abandonment. In his seat. From the co-pilot, his military backpack, old and frayed, I remembered that not everything that had made in life could be summed up as a failure. He had been on bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. There were patrolled roads riddled with explosives. He had seen comrades fall and had felt the adrenaline of survival when it seemed impossible. And yet, his own family had decided to reduce all that history to a stigma. Weil was going up the stairs, rusted up his apartment. He thought in as the peeling walls, the mattress soft and the fridge almost empty, were not product of your incompetence, but part of a carefully planned double life. No one, not his neighbors, nor his family, should know that after that facade was hiding something much bigger and more dangerous. What no one I saw that the waitress apron and the apartment with leaks were props for a dangerous play. Rebeca was part of the Special Operations Group of the U.S. Marshals Service, a unit so small than barely 40, something women throughout the country they carried that badge. Your turn in the restaurant consisted in listen, memorize faces, register license plates of cars that passed by twice same corner, and detect fake accents in overly generous customers. In his pocket was wearing always a coffee-soaked notebook where he scribbled details that for anyone would be irrelevant: a stocking, shaped scar moon in the left hand of a supplier, a badly done anchor tattoo in a driver's neck, a sweet perfume that smelled like a cheap store. but for her were pieces of a puzzle. The nights ended with encrypted reports sent from a clean cell phone that he kept in an empty cereal box, and with a quick shower to get it off the smell of grease and fear, because the fear, still when one does not names, sticks to the skin like smoke. From a friar. The sacrifices were not counted in epic heroisms, but in constant tiny renunciations. Rebeca had learned to sleep sitting up, with an eye half open and boots on, eating protein bars secretly in a bathroom of the staff, to speak in a higher voice when it was necessary to appear harmless and lower the volume of his presence until he becomes invisible. I had a different set of keys for each layer of your life. The of the real apartment, where she only entered sometimes to wash. Her tactical clothing. The from the theater apartment, where an old television. He repeated cooking competitions so that the neighbors they believed that there was someone. And the of the locker in a cheap gym, where he kept a clean set of clothes in case he had to change his identity in minutes. Your account banking showed minimum wages. Their social networks were empty of photos, and their birthday was celebrated alone with a candle stuck in a cupcake bought at the end of the shift. And even so, every time a track is approached the victim transport routes, each time a name coincided with an alias in your list, you felt that mixed strange nausea and hope that only they know who they work with, the truth hidden under 10 layers of lies. The contradiction that most bothers him. It didn't hurt to live among peeling walls feigning poverty, but rather accepting that even their own blood I saw it as a failure. When remembered, he glow cold in the Clara's eyes, and the Marcos's crooked smile. I felt a knot in the throat. Sometimes, in the longer nights, he found himself imagining what would say his parents if they were alive. His father, who taught to distinguish the sound of a broken engine only by the echo in it the road. Her mother, who covered with hand-woven blankets in the harsher winters. Would they have repeated the words cruelty of their brothers? Or would they have seen in their trembling hands, hardened by the weight of rifle and the handcuffs he was adjusting in operations, the proof of a courage that needed no diplomas? That doubt was the most painful rift, not knowing if his parents, whom he so wanted to honor with their lives, they would have fallen too in a deception of failure. And yet, every day I found reasons to resist. On one occasion, when I was leaving from the restaurant after 12 hours pretending to be invisible, he saw a child barefoot leaning out of the window of a suspicious car. He recognized it immediately. It was one of the faces that appeared in the list of possible victims. That vision you ice cream the blood, but also you. He remembered that what he did worth the penalty. To the tomorrow next, risking his cover, continued the trail of the vehicle up to an abandoned warehouse in the outskirts, where he heard conversations that confirmed his suspicions. He took note of every word, every detail, with the precision of a surgeon. I couldn't intervene still. The raid was to coordinate on a large scale, but in the silence of that early morning, while scored the description of tattoos and license plates, he understood that all his sacrifice was about to make sense. Although Clara and Marcos called shame, Rebeca knew she was approaching the truth that would save dozens of people. The climax arrived in March, in an early morning that Rebeca still remembered with the fur bristling. The operation had been planned for months, with meetings in basements, no windows, and coffee-stained maps where each red dot represented a target. She was assigned to the entry team in one of the warehouse's main ones, a place he had watched from afar so many nights that he could draw every crack from memory on its walls. The air smelled of damp and gasoline, and when the sign came by radio, felt as the adrenaline rushes to him was walking the veins like liquid fire. "Forward!" he shouted, the leader of the group, and in seconds the silence was broken with the roar of the doors being knocked down. Screams, sharp blows, boots against cement, and the metallic squeal of handcuffs clicking shut again and again. Rebeca was the first in entering the room where they kept several victims. What he saw over there will never be erased. Mattresses thrown in the floor, scratched walls, and children's faces that they looked with a mixture of fear and hope. Said with the firmest voice he could, "Now are safe." And although inside I was trembling, I needed transmit to them. Security. At the end of the operation, 17 arrests shook the criminal network in 4 states, and 43 people were released, including 12 minors. Outside, when the first ray of sun appeared, the scene, it seemed surreal. Officers hugging, ambulances attending to the victims, helicopters flying over heady sky that was no longer so dark. And there was Rebeca, with the uniform soaked with sweat, knowing that moment would never come out in the newspapers. Nobody would write his name in headlines. His heroism would be kept in confidential reports, far away within the scope of the eyes that both had court. When it was all over, there was no party, neither public recognitions, just a handshake in a windowless office and a "good work" murmured among colleagues who also they knew what it was like to live in the shadows. They handed him an order simple: take a vacation, come home, rest. But what meant home to someone who had been symbolically expelled from the yours? In the hotel where they stayed after the operation, Rebeca spent hours sitting on the edge of the bed, with the uniform hanging on the chair and boots still stained with dust. He looked at his medals shining in the dim light and thought in the irony of it all. There was risky life, had saved dozens of innocent people. And yet, for Clara and Marcos, it was still being the sister who failed. He lit the television out of habit, but only found banal programs that sounded like mockery. Nothing in that world seemed to reflect the weight of what I had just experienced. And then, like a twist of fate, he remembered the scene in the kitchen. The smell of stale coffee, the glow of the check on the table, Clara's gaze full of contempt. That memory you search in the skin more than any operative. I knew that the wound wouldn't heal if she kept silent. Clara's wedding was approaching, and even though she was uninvited, the event would become in the chance perfect for closing the circle, not as revenge, though he desire burned in its interior, but as a declaration of existence. I had to show them who was in reality, not with loud speeches, but with the truth stamped on every medal on his uniform. While kept his badges in a metal box, took the decision. She would attend the wedding not as the loser, but as what she truly was, a woman who had faced war and shadows to protect others. The wedding day dawned clear, with a spring sky so blue it seemed to mock of the whirlwind that Rebeca carried inside. She drove to the Riverside Country Club in an official Ford Explorer, government plates shining like a silent reminder of your true identity. Every kilometer traveled was a journey in heat time. I remembered that there, in that same living room, his parents had celebrated their silver wedding anniversary surrounded by friends and music, when the family still it seemed indestructible. He parked in front of the main entrance, and before getting out, he stood for a few seconds looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror. She wasn't wearing a dress or makeup, but her impeccable dress uniform, with the bronze star shining like a beacon in the chest. It happened fingers over each badge, feeling that they were not ornaments but chapters in a story that no one I had wanted to listen. When introducing yourself in the entrance, the security guard stood up immediately, recognizing the weight of the uniform before even seeing his badge. "Go ahead, Marshal," he said with respect, opening past without need to verify invitation. That small gesture already marked the difference between the past and present. Inside, the lounge. It was decorated with white flowers and crystal lamps that cast flashes on the silk tablecloths. But the murmur changed immediately upon seeing her enter. Heads turning, glasses suspended in the air, mouths whispering ancient rumors. Wasn't she the one who worked cleaning tables? He asked. Someone. They say it's a failure which lives in a hovel, he replied. Another. Rebeca walked with firm step, without allowing his face betrayed the internal storm. I knew that every distrustful glance was a new battlefield, different from those of the war, but equally decisive. In the reception, while the waiters were circulating with trays laden with champagne flutes and delicate canapes, Rebeca listened clearly the whispers that both had scored. Near the main table, the mother of the boyfriend, impeccable with a pearl necklace that looked like way more than the conscience. He murmured to two guests, "That is the sister failed, the one who lives scrubbing dishes." The three, they laughed with complicity, as if that gossip out a entertainment of the evening. Each laugh was like an echo of the family kitchen, like a cruel reminder of the label they had slapped on her name. Rebeca squeezed the teeth, but his face remained imperturbable, with the same serenity that he used in covert operations where a false gesture could mean a bullet. Was so. When decided that the moment had arrived, he gave a pass toward forward, placing itself in the center of the living room just under the crystal lamp that illuminated their metals. The conversation gradually died away, like a candle smothered by the wind. "I am the Clara's sister," he said in a firm voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I am not waitress. I am deputy, U.S. Marshal. For 3 years I was infiltrated in a human trafficking network. Last week, along with my team, we arrested 17 criminals and we rescued 3 people, including 12 children." The ensuing silence was almost sacred. The cups remained motionless in the air, the mouths open without words, and all the eyes were fixed in the badges that shone on his chest. Clara was the first in break. The makeup that she had carefully maintained during the tomorrow began to come in, thick tears that they left grooves dark in the cheeks. At first, he denied with a weak gesture, muttering that all that it must have been an exaggeration, a kind of theater to call the attention. But when Rebeca took out your official credential and placed on the main table right next to the bouquet of flowers girlfriend E, the lounge hole contained the breathing. The federal seal gleamed under the lights, unappealable, indisputable. Clara stepped back a step, as if that little plastic rectangle will weigh tons. The trembling security with the one who had always looked at her sister broke down in seconds. For the first time, not the knot from above, but from a position of total bewilderment. Marcos, on the other hand, tried to hold the facade of arrogance that he accompanied like a second skin. It was clarified the throat, accommodated his tie with a rehearsed gesture, and uttered a poisonous phrase. "That does not erase that you continue being a military failure." The air became tense, and for a moment some guests seemed gnawed, as if still doubted the magnitude of what they were hearing. But Rebeca interrupted with implacable calm. He listed the decorations received, the Bronze Star, the Medal of Valor, the figures of completed operations, and spoke of a salary and responsibilities that exceeded with you, grow any contract Marcos could boast about in his luxury law firms. His words, firm and measured, were like hammer blows in the image perfect of his brother. The silence that followed it was no longer a question of doubt, but of recognition. Murmur, the growing number of guests was clearly leaning in her favor. The guests who minutes before were whispering with disdain, now that they observed with a mixture of fascination and respect that permeated the atmosphere like a silent wave. Some were carried away hand to chest, unbelieving of having shared table with someone who had risky his life of that way. Others, they murmured among themselves, repeating the numbers of the operation as if they were legend. 17 arrests, 43 rescued. The waiters, accustomed to being invisible in the parties, they stopped a moment with the trays high to look at it like someone who witnesses something they will never forget. That woman, who until then had been the target of gossip cruel, transformed before their eyes in a symbol of courage that neither he lounge full of luxuries could eclipse. Clara's in-laws, who, until recently had they looked with condescension, were the first in approach. The father of the boyfriend, a federal judge accustomed to dissecting tests and credentials, he bowed with "I respect solemn. It is an honor to have you here, Marshal Alvarez." His words resonated throughout the living room as a final verdict. The mother, the same person who had participated in the mockery minutes before, stuttered an impromptu compliment, her cheeks red with embarrassment as she tried to disguise the previous contempt with sudden admiration. Other in-laws, previously haughty and distant, surrounded with curious questions, with the fascination of someone who contemplates a living history, Rebeca, without seeking prominence, responded with brevity and serenity, aware that each gesture of yours was redefining the narrative that there was loaded for years. In that moment, the center of the celebration, it was no longer Clara dressed as a bride, but the sister who had returned. With the strength of the true, Clara, with the voice breaking and the tears erasing any trace of the bride impeccable that he had wanted to show, opened. I walk through the guests until I reach my sister. He took her hand as if that a simple touch could erase years of contempt and disdain. Please stay, she begged, in a whisper audible, with her runny makeup and the shortness of breath. I want to introduce you as my sister, the federal marshal. Always you were stronger than I thought. His words. They desperately sought to rewrite the history in a matter of seconds, as if a title and a medal could cover the scars of a lifetime. Rebeca the noticed in silence, without hate, but with a firmness that spoke louder than any scream. His look said, I no longer need what you deny me. Marcos, for the first time in his life, he let fall the armor of pride that wrapped like an invisible suit. With a defeated sigh, approached with the shoulders drooping, unable to hold the haughty gesture that always it accompanied. I was cruel to you, Rebeca, he admitted in a low voice, enough for those who were close to hear. Doing you deserved. I want to start over, if you let me. For a moment, the air of the room was filled with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for a cinematic reconciliation. But the Rebeca's response was a dry blow wrapped calmly. I don't need to be approved. I don't need to be validated. I found my courage, and it is not here. That instant froze those present. There was no plea or apology that would suffice. The subsequent silence made it clear that Rebeca was not looking for revenge, neither reconciliation. He had chosen the freedom over the acceptance late. Rebeca left of the lounge with firm step, without looking back. The murmur of the guests was left behind like a dull echo, mixed with a clinking of glasses that no longer had any the same superficial joy of minutes before. Outside, the fresh, spring breeze caressed a face like a welcome, and for the first time in a lot time, he breathed deeply, feeling his lungs fill with more than just air. They were filled with freedom. The uniform was still impeccable, each medal shining under the lights from the country club. But now those badges were not just decorations. They were the proof tangible that your identity did not depend on the validation of Clara or Marcos. When opened the door of his Ford Explorer and sat behind the wheel, squeezed he leather cold with both hands, aware that that simple gesture symbolized he absolute control of your destiny. Driving at night always had been one of his few forms of meditation, while the road unfolded before her, illuminated by headlights. Memories of the family kitchen returned with strength, the smell of stale coffee, the check left on the table, the words cruel than they had been expelled from their place of belonging. But this time they didn't hurt the same. They were no longer wounds open, but firm scars that spoke of resistance. The image of the children rescued, with big trembling eyes, overcame the memory of the haughty faces of his brothers. And it was so, when he understood that he would never need your applause. The respect that always had searched was in the lives he had saved, in the discipline that there was sustained in the more moments dark, and in the woman who now I saw in he rear-view mirror, firm, intact, and free. Weeks after that wedding, Rebeca's life took a turn, a different rhythm. Quieter but also more authentic. He no longer had to fake a facade of misery to cover up operations. For the first time in years, could inhabit its own space, no lies. However, the emptiness that it left the break with his family weighed in some sunrises, like a shadow that stretched beyond the walls of her apartment. It was so when decided to overturn that energy in something that returned purpose. He approached a War Veterans Association in his city, a small center with walls covered in flags, folded and framed photos of men and women who had served before her. There he began to give impromptu talks, telling what it was like to return from the front and feel invisible, How survive the silence when the society thinks your story doesn't matter? It amazing was the response of the young soldiers who have just were returning from their missions. Many they arrived with the lost look, with physical scars and other deeper ones. Those that are not seen. Rebeca recognized herself in each of them, in the stiffness of his shoulders, in the restless hands that searched a cigarette, in the silences loaded with things that no one I wanted to ask. By sharing snippets of his life, without revealing details classified, but real emotions, he saw as those looks lit up, although out a little. It was like offering them a map drawn from wounds. Here you survive, here you fall, here you get back up. Those meetings, surrounded by people who understood the language of the pain and the resilience, Rebeca finally found a circle in the one who shouldn't have proved nothing. There, his scars were medals invisible, understood and honored. Contact with Clara and Marcos became almost non-existent. There was missed calls, messages shorts that tried to sound conciliatory, even a handwritten letter that Clara left in a mailbox, begging for a reunion. Rebeca read it only once and saved in a drawer without responding. I no longer felt resentment, but not either need to reoccupy a place that had marked with such contempt. I had learned that blood did not always guarantees loyalty, and that sometimes it is necessary to cut ties in order to breathe. The family that was left was in another place, in the comrades in uniform who had been shoulder to shoulder with shoulder in the missions, in the victims who now they had a second chance thanks to his work, in the young veterans who found comfort in his words. Every morning in front of the mirror, Rebeca would stop for a few seconds to contemplate her reflection. I no longer saw the sister failed, nor to the woman who pretended to be invisible in a restaurant. I saw someone who had survived the external war and the internal one. He smiled calmly, aware that the better revenge was not the acceptance late of his brothers, but the full life that was building step by step. There, in that hard-earned silence, finally found the freedom that always had searched. And although the wound of the family exclusion never disappeared completely, now it was just another brand in the skin of a woman who chose to be exactly who it had to be, with or without witnesses.